Well, hello, I'm Janet Morena, Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Just Ask Janet. Well, in today's program, we're going to have some fun for the children because we are going to have two children's books written by one of our executives, Anthony DeStefano, featured on our program. And you might be saying, Janet, what you got the Easter basket there for? Well, because we are running a great special on our online store at prolifeproducts.org, where you can get, on the previous episode, we showed you these two books, The Seed That Was Afraid to Be Planted and The Sheep That No One Could Find. Well, today we're going to have two more books that we're going to feature, and that is The Puppy That Nobody Wanted and The Miracle of the Bread, the Boy, and the Fish. And we're running a great special right now at our online store where you can order all four children's books for just a donation of $35 to our ministry. So I'm going to enjoy first now the first one. And this one is kind of special to me because look at the cover. Well, one of my dogs, my little Shih Tzus, those who watch our program know I have 3 Shih Tzus. Well, one of my Shih Tzus was kind of like the model for this story, and you're going to see him. His name is Gianni. So let's now listen to Anthony DeStefano reading The Puppy That Nobody Wanted.
Hi kids, I'm Anthony DeStefano, and this is my friend, Gianni. Gianni belongs to a lady I know and work with named Janet, and the reason why I'm holding him is because he looks a little bit like a puppy in a book I wrote that I'd like to read to you right now. It's called The Puppy That No One Wanted, and it's about a scraggly little dog that just doesn't fit in, a dog that can't seem to find a home of his own. Now, after I finish reading, I'll be back with Gianni to say a few words to you adults who are watching too, because this book isn't just for kids. The Puppy That No One Wanted. Once upon a time, there was a poor, mangy, smelly little puppy. He was the runt of the litter, and from the moment he was born, he was cast aside and forced to live on his own. Many days, he would wander through the muddy streets of town, cold and hungry, looking for something to eat. But wherever he went, people gave him nasty looks and yelled, "Get out of here, you dirty mutt! There's no food for you here." Still, he managed to be a cheerful puppy. He survived on whatever scraps he could find and never lost hope that one day he would find a home. At night, he slept in an alley with the other stray dogs. Some of them were old and sick, and in the winter they all huddled together for warmth. Often, the puppy would try to lift their spirits by making them laugh. When he fell asleep, the puppy always had the same dream. He dreamed about running through a beautiful open field of flowers under a warm, sunlit sky. And of course, he dreamed about food, lots of food. When he woke up, he was always starving. The other dogs would be hungry too, but they were too weak to go looking for food, so the puppy would have to go off alone. One day, after searching for hours and being chased away by many people, his nose caught a whiff of something delicious. It was coming from the home of the town butcher. It smelled heavenly, and the puppy just had to find out what it was. So he sneaked into the house and saw the butcher sitting at his kitchen table having lunch. The puppy's mouth watered as he watched the man eating a juicy steak. Slowly, the puppy crept through the man's legs and under the table. There were a few scraps on the floor, and the puppy hungrily ate them. If only the man would drop some more food, the puppy hoped. Suddenly, the man stopped eating. "What is that awful smell?" he yelled. Then he looked down and shouted, "Why, you dirty, stinky mutt! What are you doing under my table? Get out of here before I make dog stew out of you." The butcher tried to kick the puppy, but he managed to escape through the window. He ran as fast as he could down the street, but the butcher threw the steak bone at him, barely missing his head. Just then, the puppy had an idea. He turned around and stuck his tongue out at the butcher and started barking at him, making him even madder. The butcher threw another bone at him, and then another, and another. Every time a bone came flying at him, the puppy dodged out of the way. Soon, the man got tired of throwing bones and slammed his windows shut, yelling, "Don't you ever come back here again, you smelly little runt." The puppy looked around at all the bones on the ground. He had enough food to last him a whole week. But just as he was about to start eating, he remembered his friends, the stray dogs in the alley. He thought about how old and sick they were. So instead of eating the bones himself, he tied them together with a rope and began to haul them up the road. The load was heavy, and the puppy had to use his mouth to hold one end of the cord and carry the big bundle of bones on his back. After struggling for 6 long hours, he finally arrived at the alley. The other dogs couldn't believe all the food he had brought. They were so hungry that they dove past the puppy and onto the pile of bones, devouring it as fast as they could. The puppy just watched as they ate and ate, and when they were finished, there wasn't a trace left. As soon as they were done eating, the dogs fell asleep, happy and satisfied. But the puppy was still starving. Even though he was exhausted, he had to go out again to search for food. And to make matters even worse, it had started to rain. Walking through the streets of the town in the pouring rain, the puppy was sad and wet and cold. Everything was so muddy, there wasn't a crumb of food to be found anywhere. Just then, at the end of the road, the puppy saw some light coming from the window of a small house. He climbed up and peered inside. What he saw made his heart beat faster. For inside was a family seated around a table. There was a man, his wife, and a little boy, and they were having dinner. The puppy watched as they said a prayer and began eating. The house seemed so toasty warm. Looking closer, he saw that a piece of hot, crusty bread had fallen onto the floor next to the boy's feet. Taking a chance, the puppy jumped to the ground and sneaked into the house. When no one was looking, the puppy darted across the floor. Trying not to make a sound, he quickly ate the bread. Then he waited to see if any more crumbs would fall. But before he had a chance to eat anything else, the man above him said, "What is that awful smell?" Now I'm in trouble, the puppy thought. When he looked up, he saw the little boy staring at him. "It's a puppy who's trying to eat scraps from the table," the boy said. Then, lifting him up, he asked, "What's the matter, little dog? Haven't you eaten anything today?" The puppy wanted to tell the boy how hungry he was because he had given all his food away. But since he couldn't talk, he just yelped. The boy looked at him strangely and smiled, as though he somehow understood. Then the boy's mother said, "He's a very smelly pup. Let's get him cleaned up." So she put some warm, soapy water into a large wooden basin and handed the puppy to the boy, who started to wash him. Afterward, the woman gave the puppy a huge plate of food. The puppy couldn't believe how tasty it was. While he was eating, the man said, "He can stay here tonight because of the storm, but tomorrow we'll have to decide what to do with him." That night, the puppy slept in bed with the little boy. He watched the boy say his prayers and then snuggled up next to him. Imitating the boy, the puppy said a short prayer of his own. "Please, God, let me stay here with this nice family." Then he drifted off to sleep. And he slept and slept and slept. He dreamed all night about the field of flowers. He was still sleeping when morning came, and he heard the boy's voice. "Rise and shine, little dog. It's time to wake up." The puppy wondered what was going to happen to him. Would he be thrown out again, like all the other times in his life? Would he be cast aside and forgotten? But the boy just looked at him and said, "Follow me." So the puppy got up and trotted behind the boy and the man as they left the house and started walking down the road. Soon, they came to a small shop on the edge of town. "This is our workshop," the boy said. "My father is a carpenter, and I'm learning to be one too. And guess what, my little friend? You're going to work here too. My parents decided this morning that from now on, you can stay with us." The puppy couldn't contain his excitement. He started jumping up and down, yelping for joy. Could it really be that he finally had a home? The boy showed him the shop. It was full of tools and nails and interesting things made of wood. The puppy looked around in amazement. Imagine all the wonderful things that could be made here, he thought. In back of the shop was a door that led to a yard. When the puppy went through, his eyes opened wide, for behind the shop was a huge open field of flowers. He sat there for a long time looking at the flowers and the rolling hills and the sparrows flying high above in the sunshine. The boy patted his head softly. "It's a field of lilies," he said. "Isn't it the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" The puppy just nodded and licked the boy's hand. And from that moment on, the puppy lived with the family and was happy. The man and the boy even built a cozy row of little dog houses besides the field of flowers for all the dogs in the alley, so they would never be cold again. And forever after, the puppy belonged to the little boy. And he was the best, most faithful servant that any boy or girl could ever have. Did you like that? I know Gianni did. He's been listening the whole time quietly like a good puppy. You know, kids, the meaning of this story is very simple. Just like the puppy that no one wanted, sometimes we can feel lonely and left out, and even unloved. When that happens, you have to remember that God always loves you, no matter what. And He always wants to welcome you into His life with open arms. And that's true for us adults too. At one time or another, all of us have felt isolated and abandoned. Hey, it's easy to feel like a scraggly, smelly puppy that nobody wants. It's easy to feel like an outcast in life. But no matter how lost we might feel, what we must never forget is that we can always find our true happiness, our true fulfillment, and our true home in God. I'm Anthony DeStefano, and I'll see you next time.
Is about the miracle of the bread, the fish, and the boy. And I think you're going to like this one because I think that sounds like it has a little bit of connection to the Eucharist. So let's now see Anthony DeStefano reading the beautiful story of the miracle of the bread, the fish, and the boy. Dun, dun.
Hi kids, I'm Anthony DeStefano, and I've got this basket of bread and this plate of fish because they're part of a story I'd like to read to you now. It's called The Miracle of the Bread, the Fish, and the Boy, and it's based on a very famous story in the Bible. The story is all about how Jesus performed a great miracle and made it possible for thousands of people to have something to eat. It also taught the people a very important lesson about trusting in the power of God. Now, after I finish reading, I'll have a brief word to say to you adults who are watching too, because this book isn't just for kids.
The Miracle of the Bread, the Fish, and the Boy. Written by Anthony DeStefano. Illustrated by Richard Cowdrey. $7.47. The little boy could hardly believe it. He looked down and counted the money again. $7.47. And he had saved it all by himself. It had taken him a long time, but he had managed to do it by helping the people in his town carry their packages, by doing extra chores around the house, and by never spending even a penny of the tiny allowance his mother gave him. He had saved his money for one reason: to buy his mother a special present for her birthday. You see, the little boy lived in a fishing village by a lake with only his mothers and brothers. He had no father, and his family was very poor. His mother had to work long hours just to put food on the table. But one day the boy had an idea. If he could save enough money, maybe he could buy his family a week's worth of food, and his mother would be able to stay home for a few days and rest her tired feet. So the boy saved his pennies and nickels for months. Finally, on the morning of his mother's birthday, he got up extra early, just as the sun was rising, and walked to the village market by himself. If only I could buy the food and bring it back home before my mother wakes up, he thought. She'll be so surprised. When he got to the food market, he went straight through the door and reached up high to put his money on the counter. Then he boldly said to the shopkeeper, "May I have a week's worth of fish and bread, please?" The shopkeeper was a mean-looking old man. He counted the money slowly and said in a grumpy, gravelly voice, "This is only $7.47. You expect to buy a week's worth of food with this?" "Why not?" asked the boy. "Isn't that enough?" The old man squinted his eyes and growled, "Why, it's hardly any money at all." He turned around and walked to the back of the store. In a few seconds, he returned with 2 fish and 5 small loaves of bread. He plopped them down on the counter in front of the boy. "That's all your money will buy," he said harshly. "But that's not even enough for dinner," the boy protested. "That's all your money will buy," the man grumbled as he turned away from the boy. The boy left the shop feeling heartbroken. He carried the fish and bread in a small basket under his arm, his head hanging low. "Now what am I going to do?" he sobbed. "I worked so hard. I thought I had saved up a treasure. But now I don't have any money and hardly any food, and my mother won't be able to stay home from work even one day. I'm just a failure." But as the boy walked home, he noticed a crowd of people gathering a short distance away. There were old people, young people, rich people, poor people, sick people, handicapped people, thousands of people, and all of them were making their way up the side of a large, sloping hill. The boy asked someone what all the commotion was about. "Haven't you heard? The great teacher from Nazareth is here, and he's healing the sick and preaching about God." The boy strained his neck, but couldn't see over the heads of the crowd. In fact, the swarm was so thick that he could barely move. So crouching low, he began to go through the people's legs. Because he was so small, he was able to move quickly, and before long, he was close to the edge of the crowd. When he finally peeked out from under someone's robe, he saw the great teacher sitting on a rock. The sun was behind him, and he seemed to be carved out of the light. The boy listened to the man speak. He didn't sound like most other adults the boy knew. His words were so simple, and yet they seemed so wise. Just then, one of the men who was with the teacher saw the boy and pulled him up by his sleeves. He brought him over to the teacher and said, "Lord, this boy has 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." The teacher looked down and said, "Little boy, there are thousands of people here, and they're very hungry. Will you give me your bread and fish so I could feed them?" The boy was confused. "But how could you do that?" he asked. "This food that I bought isn't even enough to give my family. How can it feed this big crowd?" The teacher smiled gently and spoke to him in a quiet voice. "Little boy, don't you know that with God all things are possible? Don't you know that if you offer everything you have to God, He will multiply all the good things you do?" The boy remembered what his mother had taught him about God. He nodded his head and answered, "Yes, I know that God can do anything." The teacher stretched out his hand and asked the boy once again for his basket of bread and fish. The boy thought for a second and decided to trust the man. He gave him all that he had. The man took the food and said a short prayer of thanks. He told the crowd to sit down and laid the basket on the ground. Then he closed his eyes. Suddenly, the boy heard a low rumbling sound. It started quietly, but it grew louder and louder. Soon it seemed as if the earth was shaking under his feet. Just then, the boy noticed that instead of 1 basket of bread and fish, there were 2. Then there were 4. Then there were 8. Then 10. In no time at all, there were hundreds of baskets on the ground containing thousands of fish and loaves of bread. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. It was a miracle. The men who were standing near the teacher began to give the food to the people in the crowd. Everyone ate until they were full. When they were finally done, there were 12 baskets of bread and fish left over. Then the teacher said to the boy, "Remember, without God you can do nothing. But when you pray and ask God for help, He will bless all that you do and give you the power to do incredible things." Before going back home, the boy stopped at the lake in his village and thought about what had happened. He didn't have any money or bread or fish or a present for his mother. He should have felt sad, but for some reason he didn't. He had seen a great miracle and was happy to have helped the teacher feed thousands of people. "I only wish I had a small gift for my mom," he thought. But when he got home, an amazing surprise awaited him. His mother rushed over to him in excitement. She pointed to a huge basket of bread and fish in the corner. "Some men came by just now and dropped off this basket," she cried. "It's enough food to last us a whole month. The men told me they were giving it to you because you helped them today." The boy remembered the leftover baskets of food and smiled. He looked at his mother and said, "It's not for me, Mom. It's for you. It's your birthday present. Now you can finally stay home from work and rest a while." His mother had tears of joy in her eyes. "This is the best present anyone has ever given me," she said, and hugged her son tightly.
Did you like that? I hope so. You know, kids, the meaning of this story is very simple. Just like the little boy, if you say yes to God and do whatever He asks, He's going to help you. And not only that, but He'll take whatever you do and turn it into something much bigger and much greater. He'll multiply all the good that you do. And the same is true for you adults, too. If you're worried or anxious because you have something very difficult to do, you just have to have faith and say, "God, I'm going to do this for you. Jesus, I trust in you. And just like the miracle of the loaves and the fishes, God will take your sacrifice and transform it into something unexpected and amazing. Hey, God is still working miracles every single day. You remember that. I'm Anthony DeStefano, and I'll see you next time.
Wasn't that a great story? Of course, we know it's taken right after the multiplication of the bread and the fish from the Bible. But what a great way to introduce children to that beautiful, beautiful miracle that Jesus performed when he was here on earth. So again, the miracle of the bread, the boy, and the fish. And of course, in this episode, we also heard my little favorite, like Gianni, the puppy no one wanted. And in the previous episode, we featured these other two books, which was The Sheep That No One Could Find and The Seed That Was Afraid to Be Planted. And we're running a beautiful special right now, just in time for you to get for Easter. That way you can obtain all 4 of these beautiful books for a donation to our ministry of just $35. I think you're going to love getting these books to read to your children, and they make great Easter presents too. I know as a Nana, I have read them to my grandchildren, and they love these stories. So this is Janet Miranda, Executive Director of Priests for Life. Happy Lent, and pretty soon we'll be saying Happy Easter. God bless.
I will be silent no more.